First up, the boring aspects of doing something like this. With Guillermo and Dan Lauschten, I'm just going to say straight up, everything has to move and everything has to move fast.
Welcome to Inside the Set with SETDECOR, a series that focuses on the design and decor of the stories that excite us and ignite our imagination, where we discuss the collaboration between set decorators and production designers and hear first-hand accounts of how these works of art came to be, from their inception, ideas on a page, to completion, when we get to sit in the dark and experience them collectively.
Welcome to Inside the Set with SETDECOR. I'm Halina, Siwolop, SDSA, and today I'm very excited to welcome set decorator View SDSA and production designer Tamara Deverell to discuss their incredibly creative collaboration on Guillermo del Toro's ambitious retelling of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, his breathtaking new film that weaves beauty and brutality into a stunning visual and emotional experience. Shane and Tamara, thank you so much for joining me today. I have many decor and design questions that I'm dying to ask about, but the most obvious one for me to start with, and I'm sure you've been asked this many times before, is how do you enter a project like this where there have been multiple film versions of Frankenstein throughout the decades? How do you develop and craft your own Frankenstein experience?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, we've both worked with Guillermo. We have a long history with him. So when he asks to do a movie, no matter what the subject, there's automatically a Guillermo filter, I call it. Like there's a certain way that you're going to approach this project. However, that being said, he was still writing when I started, and I think I was like, Frankenstein, first thing I did was reread the book, which I hadn't read since I was a kid, looking for the big moment of creation that you've seen in so many movies. Of course, it doesn't really exist in Mary Shelley's novel, much to my chagrin. The scene where the creature comes to the bed that Guillermo had us do, we had built this special bed, the mother's bed that was in the lab, that played in many different locations, in fact. That he sort of did his own true telling of that part of the book. But I actually, for this movie, I had the opportunity first to spend time with Guillermo while we were location scouting in the UK and mostly in Scotland. And that really set the tone, I think, for us visually. We had Guy Davis there, who was Guillermo's hero concept illustrator, who also had already done some stuff early on when Guillermo was just gestating it as an idea. So Guillermo comes with a package of ideas and drawings, like the Medusa in the lab, for example, was always there. And then we take it from there, and it's, a big collaboration. But, walking the streets of Edinburgh with the wet cobblestone, where we knew we were going to shoot, really, for Guillermo and I, it was like, this is it. This is our color palette. And going to various places, the Gosford house where we shot the Frankenstein villa, these are the colors that we want, that kind of thing.
Great. And Shane, you've worked with Guillermo also, and you guys have worked together previously, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
And that must have really helped with the collaboration process.
It's a language that I really understand with Guillermo and with Tamara, and that's a really nice thing to come into when you start a project. You're not getting used to someone, the way they work, trying to figure out how to insert yourself. It's that thing that everyone knows their job, everyone knows their place. And Tamara is very ingratiating with letting you bring in ideas and sort of come to her with how you feel sort of things should go. And Guillermo is also the same way, but they also have their ideas about how it goes. And coming into a project where you've worked with them a few times, the language. And so it really is just something you automatically understand. And the great thing about that movie was Tamara went early in a survey with a very, very small contingent, but then also very early on, before we started shooting, many, many months before, we did a survey also. And what was nice was to really feel out those locations and sort of get an idea where Guillermo and Tamara are kind of standing on that. And the nice thing for me is that they left me alone for 5 days after that in London so that I could go see the prop houses. And it just gave me an idea about what I could do, what I needed to fill. And also, Tamara loves museums. So any waking moment that we had, we would visit every museum that had to do with the project. You know, it was just amazing to go see these amazing recordings of history that we don't really have in North America. And so getting to see those things close up really gave us the preparation to do the movie.
Yeah, like we went to the Hunterian Museum, which I had gone to with Guillermo. And when I went back with Shane and a few of our UK art department, we went there again because it was just so, it was where the real Evelyn tables are. And it's just full of doctors' equipments and technology of the era. So it was really a great place to be. And we also went to the Cutty Sark, which is a ship, because we had to build a ship. Not exactly the same era, they're very close, but just to walk on a sailing vessel of the 1800s was a great experience for us, for all of us.
That must have been a nice moment to start the creative process, start the wheels turning, and also to kind of figure out this is a massive project and how are we going to tackle it? And I believe I heard that there was about 119 sets total, spanning 2 different continents, and let's just throw a giant ship that's stuck in ice, right? So how did you do that? And how did you decide what to build versus shooting on location?
We actually did look for a ship because there are a couple of ships that are one in, I think it's in South Africa, that's used for filming, but none of them were appropriate. None of them were an Arctic exploration vessel. You know, they weren't at the exact period. Not that we're making a historic, documentary about a ship, but I did. The way I work with Guillermo is I steep myself in research and references and history, and he comes at it from a fantastical kind of tone and operatic. He wanted us to be theatrical and operatic. The ship wasn't really the place to do that. We wanted to ground it. We wanted to make it feel really real. So we had to build it, and we ended up building it in the parking lot of our studio. For convenience sake, it meant we lost all our crew parking, all our tech truck parking. But it was handy in that, if the weather was inclement, we could go inside. We had stages right there. And it was handy for us to build things, and the set dressers, putting the tents. And, we had Jim Dine come from the UK, who's an actual sailor. And he did all our rigging, helped us with the rigging, and helped us advise on the dressing of the ship and the placement of the different pieces of the ship.
So Shane, how did you go about tackling dressing pretty much a giant life-size ship? And were you guys in charge of all the rigging of the cables and everything?
So we hired this amazing guy named Jim Dines from the UK. And Jim Dines is like a bit of an institution in the UK, kind of will say around the world, because he can build all the ropes, he can do all the rigging. And so we hired him to come in, but we all worked together as a group with the dressers and everything to build the sails, build all the ropes, do all the eyelets. And, the dressing on the boat, we built the majority of it to sort of go with the boat. And, it was always great to have a sounding board with Jim Dines because he had done it for such a long time. But, it's the thing that it's always nice to have talent behind you, because I'm not a master of that kind of stuff, but we're able to elaborate and riff and heighten and do what we need to do to make it look right.
The amount of detail on this is amazing.
Another interesting aspect of us having Jim Dine in the set deck department basically was the ADs found out about him, and he did a boot camp for all the sailors on the boat, actually showing them how to do the things that sailors do, like winding ropes appropriately. So, which to me is, people are an important part of our set. So it was really, as Guillermo says, all the departments blend together. We're all working to the same goal. So it was really nice that we had Jim on there to help with that as well.
It's just amazing. And this was shot in outside of Toronto?
No, it's pretty much downtown. You can see downtown Toronto in the background in some of the photos, where VFX did an amazing job of extending it and putting it in the Arctic. You can see also where we truncated the full height of the masts, although the art department designed the whole height. We truncated it with a truss system that had snow rigs, lights, grip blacks, green screens, blue screens, steam, every manner of thing off that black truss system that we needed to create the Arctic and make it work. It was also built on a giant gimbal, so that when the creature pushes it in this one very important moment, it's actually physically moving, which was quite remarkable.
We also had the lifeboats built in Nova Scotia, where I'm from. We found a master shipbuilder in the middle of nowhere, and the guy just belted those out really, really fast, and it was really, really beautiful.
So I'm just curious, how long does it take to build a ship from scratch, where you're literally manufacturing everything?
Yeah, it was a lot of engineering too, because of the gimbal that had to, so there was a whole metal truss. So that metal truss and the engineering of the gimbal took a good couple of months before we even started cladding it. So we were, building the mast in the studio, the ice in the studio, as you can see, like even the ice field was built. And figuring out how to build ice was a whole other realm of how do we do this? We had to sort of create it. But once we got going, the nice thing, I guess it was 13 months before from starting to draft it to finish. There's a lot of layers of set dressing, a lot of layers of paint that goes on something like this. And there's a lot of little things. We also had Matthew Betts, who's a Arctic archaeologist working with us. And he was a model builder as a hobby, and he had built an Arctic expedition. One of the things he pointed out with Arctic exploration ships at the time is that they had iron plating on the front to cut through the ice. So we did this iron plating with actual iron plates that we rusted and aged. And they were sort of Frankenstein. They were a little sort of Frankenstein motif, in that they were sort of, custom made, sutured on, as it were. So I've always liked those plates that we put, and it allowed for a different texture and a different aging.
Yeah, the texture is beautiful.
Mhm.
And Shane, the interior of the ship, did you have to do a lot of research for that? And where did you source out a lot of your things, or I think you had said you had built some stuff. Tell us a little bit about that process.
The hard part about the interior of this is foreground. And for the most part, it's hard to get foreground in these ships, because for the most part, they didn't have them. So what we did was we kind of overbought that set a little bit to sort of play with sort of pieces in front of the bench. And we ended up buying a whole bunch of stuff at flea markets in London when I was over there early on to ship back the chair, pieces of the desk, and a lot of the instruments. And then we ended up buying a lot of stuff in Massachusetts, in Pennsylvania, and upstate New York. It's always those small little collectors that have those pieces. And it was just a real great way to sort of cobble it all together.
Very, very impressive. So it seems to me like this is a giant set. I know we're going to get into details on some of your other built sets. How did you guys manage multiple crews across different continents, or how did that work?
So for me, early on, we made the decision to hire a really great senior assistant decorator in the UK. Her name was Halina, and she stayed on with us the whole show. And it was probably not the easiest conversation with production, but they, in the end, were very happy with the whole process because of being a European film for the sets and locations and stuff. She was really great at helping us sort of find things when we needed to on short notice, and sourcing stuff in the UK and in Europe. So we had her most of the time, and we did a lot of builds in the UK, the bedspreads and other pieces and the voile and stuff like that. We had all that built in the UK, so she was very good at managing that. And so we had her for the whole show. And then we started the UK crew probably about 3 months, 2.5, 3 months before we moved over there. It was sort of a bit of a management thing, but the reality is I had such good luck with crew. I really had the best crew in the UK and in Toronto. And when you have that, it just makes my life so much easier.
You know, and the nice thing with Halina also, she did incredible research. And this was such a research heavy show. Like there was just no end to the amount of research and the learning curve that we all had to do. So to have somebody in the UK not only just finding stuff, but going like, oh, here's what carriages look like. And she broke it down for us. And her skill level was amazing for that.
Her Bibles for research, you would ask for something, and then the next day you would get a 30 to 40 page document with everything laid out with measurements. I mean, she really was a machine. I mean, you couldn't have asked for uh, a better person for that job.
Yeah.
That's amazing. We all need that person, right?
We do.
Yeah, and also in the art department, we also had Celestria Kimmons, who was, you know, working for a bit as an art director, and then she did some set design because we could justify her. So she was drawing a set that we were building in Toronto, and then we managed to keep her going more or less so that we could also continue her through as the art director because we needed somebody there in the UK. And there was also somebody who was with us when Shane and I first went. We had Halina and we had Celestria, and we went to like the Crossness pumping station that was one of our major kind of inspirations for the lab with the windows and stuff. It's an actual water treatment plant, which our lab was a water treatment plant, a water filtration plant was, you know, the backstory of the lab, that it was abandoned or never opened.
So on that note, let's get into some of the decor specifics and the design specifics. And let's start with Frankenstein's apartment. The color palette is warm and delicious, you know, enhanced by the beautifully layered set decor, all the nooks and crannies packed with details. All these elements make for an overall cozy and curious space. It has a feeling of a building that has been lived in, aged, and settled. Can you tell us a little bit about your design process?
Well, I'll start first. When you say aged and settled, it was so crooked. I had to make the carpenters I drove them crazy trying to make the walls angled and slanted and the windows off kilter, you know, because they're all about right angles. So it almost shows the crookedness. I always feel like when I look at those windows, which were very difficult for Dan Lauschton to light from, we had a lot of difficulty, and Shane came up with the curtains on those big skylights. I always think of the Demon Barber of Fleet Street, that movie, what's it called? You know, the musical. This was, I think, one of the first sets we did, and it was really an opportunity to create character. And I think Shane can talk about the set dressing specifics because it was so much about the set dressing. When Oscar Isaac walked into the space, he just lit up, and he was like, you know, that moment when an actor goes, oh my God, this is who I am. these are my layers, and where is this? And it was just such a beautiful moment for us to see him make it his place. And a lot of the dressing that we established here, then he moves to the lab. So you see the bed in the background that gets moved to his quarters in the lab. And we see it earlier in the movie when he's a young child sleeping in his mother's bed. Those beautiful wax figurine, the anatomical waxes were by Nathalie Latour, who's somebody that Guillermo knew about in France. And he actually commissioned her to build those for us, custom build all these anatomical waxes that were incredible.
The really amazing thing about those waxes is Guillermo brings you the research and he lays the palette for you. So it makes what I do so much easier because I don't have to go through the exploration process of that. It's sort of there. And the waxes, you know, we got those things quite early, and they were just really a marvel to see because they're wax. They don't do that anymore. And those are the original ways they were built. And they were really a big inspiration. And for Guillermo in this set, all I can say is Bernie Wrightson, Bernie Wrightson, Bernie Wrightson.
Yes, that's right.
Guillermo loves Bernie Wrightson, and you sort of take inspiration from Bernie's illustrations, but you kind of have to interpret those illustrations because the way Bernie does them is they're so chaotic and frenetic and so full that they would never honestly be shootable. So you kind of have to reinterpret Bernie and sort of bring those elements in so you kind of get the aspect of that when you do it. And so that was a really great process to sort of go through. And, the level of aging in this set is incredible. Every piece is touched. Every single fabric is extremely saturated and brought down and brought into the level of what it was. And, we built a lot of furniture just to be able to do that and age them down. And we also bought a lot of furniture in the UK. We rented a lot of lab equipment in the UK, but we also, we shop the whole East Coast of the United States and in Quebec to sort of bring these pieces together. And it was just months and months and months of collecting. And it was really such a joy to dress because I've got to say that Tamara and construction and paint, they did such a beautiful job pulling that thing together and made it so easy. And I just need to give a shout out to my fabric and upholsterer, Allison Eason. She, started off in the paint department and then 5 years ago decided that she wanted to do breakdown. And so she's just been a self-taught study. And what she's been able to do to the furniture and those sets to bring them and tie them in was so beautiful.
Well, I have to say, you were talking about joy, and it was just such a joy to watch these scenes in here that the acting was lovely, but I found myself really going into your details as a set decorator, like, oh, that's amazing. Even the worn tassels on that sofa, I was like, oh, that's
My
perfect.
favorite thing. I love those worn tassels.
Yes.
But, even getting to the color of the liquids, it was such a process with Guillermo. You know, we originally, when we did a rough dress, we brought all the lab glass in. And the first thing out of Guillermo's mouth was, we need to glaze all of it. So, even pieces that we had rented that were, 100, 150 years old, having to glaze in a tobacco, he was right for sure. But every single piece in that thing was touched.
And hopefully that didn't happen the night before, right?
No, the really nice thing about working with a director like Guillermo is that he will never show up to a set on the day. The man will always visit, even months before as they're being built, and your stuff is laid out. He sees it as it comes together. There's no surprises. And it's such a nice language with him because he's super interested in the builds, how it goes, walking with the DP to make sure that the lighting, windows and everything sort of work and what they do. And, so it's always a work in progress. So when you get there on the day, it's never unsettled or chaotic. It's always, could you just do this or just do that? And it's a great process.
That's lovely. And you were talking about the glazes and everything. So let's talk about the colors a little bit. I know that the characters' costumes were very curated with specific color schemes. Tell me how this affected the color choices used on set, whether it's on the set or in the decor, and how was your color collaboration with the costume department?
Big collaboration with Kate. There's nothing that we don't share with going back and forth with color. I mean, we knew what Guillermo wanted. There was some very specifics that Guillermo wanted with the red, which was the mother's signifier, and you can see it through the red bed that we were doing, but also the red veil that the mother's wearing that then goes into Elizabeth's character with the red around her bonnet, which then translates to the red that we put around the coffin when the mother dies. So there's this whole tale of red that the red thread throughout that was really important. And in general terms with Kate, what I was trying to do is certainly like on, depending on the set, but with the ship, I really wanted to not make it monochromatic, but take away the color. Not so much in the captain's quarters. We had some rich Royal Navy blues and golds, but there were just 4 colors there: black, white, gold, and blue, so that she could, showcase, like, the sailors' costumes were actually quite an intense blue, which really worked. And so in other sets, depending on the set, I really want to, like, allow the costume to play in the space. And some, rarely is there a happy accident, but when you go back and you look, like when Elizabeth is in Victor's apartment, we were just watching, with the green and the rust colored dress that she's wearing, it so works in so many ways that that burgundy red, not rust color, that burgundy and that green. So she's popping just enough, because we've created this general sort of tobacco stained color palette with all the set and all the dressing. And yet it complements each other. I really think, like, the sofa, I guess the sofa's the rust and she's more the purple, and it's just not a color that we put in there. So yeah, we really worked closely with her on that.
One of the main jobs as a set decorator really is to work with the costume designer to really make sure the costumes pop, that they don't overlap with each other to the point where it's really our job to make the costumes pop. So desaturation against the costume is super, super important. At the same time, to make sure that it blends with the environment, but it also stands out. And so, I think Tamara and I worked really hard with Kate to make sure that happened.
Interesting in this still, that red that's around Elizabeth's bonnet, and in the background you see the painting, which you see earlier in the Frankenstein family study, and that's the mother in the red dress. So you can really see the play, which of course we based on a dress that Kate provided, and we did a photo shoot before we did the painting. But you can sort of see that play of reds there. Really worked.
Beautiful. Well, let's move on to Frankenstein's tower and lab that he moves into. Such beauty in the decay and the rot. You had mentioned the Medusa head before, and then there's that lovely supersized round window, and the massive amounts of blood and body parts. So many body parts. The set design is stunning, and the decor is exactly what a mad scientist would have. What was the most challenging part of the set for both of you?
I think there were actually really 4 different looks for the lab, and they all had to work and all had to be spectacular. So when they first enter the lab, it's this abandoned water tower, and it's leaves and vines and, like, no dressing. It was a completely different set. And then it becomes a scene where they're renovating, a short scene, but it still was a big dress for us, where they're renovating it into the lab. So there's, like, architecture tables, there's crates that Shane had the guys build and all that kind of stuff. And then we go into the moment of creation, where we're with all the bodies, and we pulled every body. We had A-list bodies, B-list bodies, C-list bodies for the deep background. Each body part, every foot that anybody had painted, because it was multiple departments doing it, were used in that scene with buckets of blood, that Guillermo was pouring buckets of blood. And then the final scene would be like the explosion scene, for which we built a miniature in Shepperton. Magic Camera Company did some miniatures that Guillermo insisted on, which were fantastic, because there is nothing like, a real thing to film. So there was a 1 to 40 scale miniature of this entire lab interior for the explosion scene, with the big towers, battery towers coming down. 11 or 12 foot high full tower for the exteriors. Of the tower itself, there were 8 built sets plus the miniatures in various, there was a lobby before and a lobby when it was snowed and after post-explosion. So many pieces, many different stages for this.
Shane, tell me a little bit about some of the decor that you put in there.
First up, the boring aspects of doing something like this. With Guillermo and Dan Lauschten, I'm just going to say straight up, everything has to move and everything has to move fast. So, when you're building the scale of these things, they're big and they're heavy. the aspects of the lab that we carried from Victor's apartment to the inside, but just making it a bit grander, slightly more mechanical. And, in there, for me, just to get an imprint, you had to build sort of height in there to get the reflection of the glass. All the tables in there were built on a slight curve to mold the room. So they felt like they were purposeful in that room and they didn't feel sort of awkward with the lines that were in there. Everything is round, everything is circular, everything has shape. So, it really was that sort of whole process of trying to sort of get in there and make sure that the stuff was really kind of seen. Because the scale of that thing, it was huge. It was a monster.
I love that detail about the curved tables. I did not pick that up, but it also looked correct, so you did your job well.
It's just that little stuff that when you see it to the naked eye, it doesn't quite work. The nice thing when you look at the lab and you look at the tables, they just feel like they're meant for the room. And so you don't notice it. It is a really, really good detail.
What about the giant batteries?
Oh my
my
God,
God.
so much work. So Guy Davis did the original concept for that. It was amazing drawing, but to actually transform them to full builds was so difficult. We had 3 different people, I think, drew them in the art department, modeled and drew. And we rebuilt them a couple of times because they just weren't right, to be honest, like, getting the curves and getting them to feel period, but also like spectacular, and the feeling that it was a green glass that could go from green to red, that had smoke in it, that had looked like there was fluid in it, that Dan could light the inside of. All of that was difficult enough, but then SETDEC had to do all the dressing, the dials, the valves, the things that, Victor's Frankenstein's toying with, and there's steam coming out of that. In and of itself was, I think, months of work, right, Shane, just to get all that dressing on, and add it, and each one was unique. And then on top of all of that, then we of course aged it, but on top of all of that, as Shane mentioned, these things had to move. So they were on wheels and you could push them around to get them out of the way of the camera crane, which Guillermo and Dan loved to swing that crane around. So
It's the subtle steampunk. You don't want to do steampunk because it's quite cliche, but you need to sort of go through the technology of the time and make sure that you're not crossing the line with it. It needs to be believable in some aspects. And so when you're sort of building something like that, there's a subtle, it's almost like a sculpt. Each one of those pieces was, there was a building block that made it look uniform, but in the end of it, they were kind of cobbled and a little bit different. And, you sort of had to make that the point that as they were building, they sort of had to do certain things here and there to make it feel slightly more ad hoc. But, it worked in the end, but it was a lot of trial and error getting there.
I'm glad you made that point though about steampunk, because it's definitely there, but it's believable. It's really
That's the
subtle.
thing.
Really
It's
good.
it's because you look at references of steampunk and it can be over the top. The word subtlety and steampunk don't really go hand in hand. So trying to make it streamlined and make it, a lot more palatable for me was really, really hard to do.
and that Y table, that the creature was, we called it the Y crucifix, actually, that he's assembled on. I mean, that was built by Clausen FX, and it was a team of people just to build that. Oscar Ciccone did the original drawings for that, and it was so intricate and it was so beautiful, and it had to move with a human on it. We had to have parts on it. It was an incredibly intricate build. The things light up the back, and all within the feeling that, oh yes, this could have existed in the period, which is what I really wanted to get across, so the audience isn't thinking, oh, this is sci-fi, this isn't this is, to me, a period movie. So the technology we were using, I was constantly trying to justify it within the period, the realm of the period, even though it's fantastical.
And you really need to keep within the boundaries of the period so that you're not getting that big suspension of disbelief. You have to feel. And, God bless, Guillermo was really able to work all the technology of how to get there, of how we started to how we got to the creature. And it's believable. It's that not leap of faith that you sort of have to take. It was really, really a great process.
So let's talk about one of my other favorite sets, because I have many, which is the creature cell. All that beautiful tile work, the vaulted ceilings, the running water, the moss, the chill. I mean, it all felt very real for me. Like, I think I grabbed the blanket, right? So, um, let's talk about that set and what was the inspiration for that?
Guillermo early on had some, as I mentioned, Guy had done some illustrations which don't look anything like the cell, but it was tiled, and he had a big circle where, and Elizabeth and the creature. And I always go into everything with Guillermo, and I think Shane does too, knowing that the circle motif is a big one for him. It's full of symbol and meaning, the circularity of life, the roundness of Mother Earth, whatever it is for Guillermo. So that was Guillermo's thing, this tiled kind of nightmare of a place. And then for me, I've been looking at these vaulted ceilings. I mean, all my life I've been looking at vaulted ceilings. I've always wanted to do a vaulted ceiling set. Really tricky to do. I don't regret it, but it was really hard for us to do. We had to figure out a way to wild it. You can sort of see it in this photo from the one section just below the arches. So the whole ceiling was hung, and the guys actually built a machine. Our incredibly talented welders built a machine to lift and take out each column so the camera could move through the space. And the tiles, so the tiles, we actually made tiles, and we used real tiles, and we had to match them. We found some sort of antique bone tiles, and then we made MDF tiles. But wherever there's water, which there was this whole waterway, we had to use real tiles. And tiles don't like curves. And we were really pushing our luck with making tiles and curves. And then, we built the set dressing there, all the pipes and tubes. Again, our amazing team of set dressers putting together those with our scenics, those pipes and tubes, and just, the geometry of that. That was a whole level. And then we started with the moss. At some point, Guillermo said to me, me and Shane and everybody, we need moss. I want a moss squad. And he had one on Pan's Labyrinth, apparently. And I was like, whatever a moss squad is, what is that? So we created this kind of moss squad out of, between the set dressers, the greens, obviously, and the painters, the scenics, we started mossing. And I would go down particularly to this set. And I went down one day and I mossed one corner with the guys. And I ran back and I took a picture and ran to set to show Guillermo on my iPad. Guillermo, what do you think of this moss? I really like it. And he was like, I love it. And I really loved it because to me, it was the creature, even though he was man-made, it was his strange connection to nature and the leaves and the leaf that he finds, and just that he somehow, despite being so man-made, he's more connected to nature. And you see that with the deer and when he sort of starts living with the blind man, that there's this beauty there. That it's tangible, that he's so connected. And then Jacob Elordi. I mean, the translucency of Mike Hill's prosthetics and the tile relating to bones and spinal cords and all these things that are going through my designer head, which I think the audience feels that was really really special when I saw that all coming together, that you see this translucent creature in this tiled nightmare and how it all sort of blends. And then Elizabeth comes down and pops in a beautiful way.
And this is a set that was repurposed, right? You said part of it was the
Yes,
ice room, and then
yeah, we decided this was a dual chamber, or one was the cell was below, and the ice chamber, which was the same set, was a cleaner version where he put Harlander's body, and there's a small scene. So we shot that first, and then we went like crazy redressing it and reformulating it into the creature cell.
you guys are so much more that we can unpack here. I know you had to work with the director of photography for lighting and coordinating all of that, uh, beams of light, single source lighting, those skylights where the light's coming in. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't make a move without getting Dan's thoughts or thinking like Dan if he's not there, but usually on a Guillermo movie, we have the privilege of having the DP on early and we build models, physical models, 3D models of all the sets, and we play around with the lighting, like this lobby set, for example, the lab set was a big, and he's doing all single point lighting from outside the building. So it's very natural lighting, theatrical, but natural. So you're really, we're having so many conversations. And then Shane, not one window covering is done without vetting it with our cinematographer.
Yeah, Dan's a big window treatment manipulator. And so, there's a lot of conversations with him really about texture, the translucency, the color. And, you're going through 4 to 5 iterations of something to get to where he's comfortable with what he needs to do. And, the bane of my existence is candles on this movie. I'm not going to tell you the numbers of candelabras that we went through on that show. And, single, double, triple wick candles all had their purpose in that show. It just depended on the day and what they needed to do for the light of those rooms. And even going into all those mansions and stuff, there were also very different requirements from the historical societies of what you could do and what you couldn't do. I'm not a fan of tall candles. I'm a fan of stubbies as per here. So for me, the amount of wastage that you go through just to have that stubby for 20 minutes, it's such a simple thing, but tall candles don't look that great.
So
And just
true.
trying to do the balance of that, you drive my team crazy. I mean, on these days, there would be 4 to 5 people on standby just for what I'll call stubby replacement. And it's such a simple thing, but it's trying to make candlelight look good is a really big deal. It's hard because they can look terrible at times if the candle's not straight, if it's not burning properly, just the one could be wonky, you know, that's
If
the
there's
lighting
a
with the DP.
breeze. I mean, we
Yeah.
did camera tests for the candles. We did so many, tests. And there's, because it's an organic thing, you're still, there's always going to be a surprise with natural beeswax candles.
But
So
I give kudos to the DP because there were probably 25 to 28 locations in the UK. And, when you're shooting a different location, on most days, Dan had a lot of things that he could do and a lot of things that he could not do. Like on this shot here with Dan Laushton, we were not allowed to touch the drapes, the velvets on the outside. They were there for 150, 160 years. They were really fragile. So we would have a historical society person in there on standby to touch those, but the insides, the sheer stuff were us, the two layers on the inside. So on the day, it would drive Dan crazy that he would have to talk to 3 different people just to maneuver a drape 2 centimeters to the right. It's those conversations with him, but he is very, very good at what he does. And again, I think that was my third show with him. So you kind of have a language with him, but he is definitely particular, and he knows exactly what he wants.
Well, I'm also going to say that you guys both are very, very good at what you do. So it's a complete collaborative process and very well done. So on the last note, what was your favorite set? What was your biggest challenge? Anything pop out at you?
gosh, they're all my babies. It's not fair to ask what the favorite one is. On any given day, it could be the Harlander bathroom set that we built with one of the smallest sets. But I think Victor's apartment overall, what I call his Edinburgh apartment, because it was such a character piece and it was just so layered and rich. To me, it just was such a fulfillment of a dream. I love doing the ship. The ship was fascinating, but the apartment was really gorgeous. Challenge-wise, I'd say the lab, because just so many moving parts, so much history and lore, just everything about that, and making Guillermo happy and being operatic and theatrical, but still grounded in some kind of reality. That was a tough one. And 5 different looks or whatever it was.
And Shane?
There's 2 challenging ones for me for different reasons, but the library, with the young boy, that was built from scratch. Like, we had the shell, but there was no library there. It was just an old great hall. So all the bookcases had to be built. It was a monster. And, of all the libraries they could have surveyed and picked in the UK, Guillermo walked into that room and just said, "I love this room. I want to make it a library." So, it was definitely a very, very big beast. But I also will say the book stalls in Edinburgh, we were there at a time during tourist season, and you had at least 100,000 tourists every day staring at you to build a set that was penned off by gates. But Guillermo changed that book market stall 4 times. We moved it to different areas of the lower core of Edinburgh. So, Tamara can attest to it, that we're picking up
Pictures of Shane. I have photographic evidence.
And walking them by hand through thousands and thousands of people to navigate into another narrow hall that Guillermo now wants to shoot. Full rain, which wasn't purposely, it was supposed to be light rain that turned into heavy rain.
Books.
Thousands of books that just, in the end, just got completely destroyed. But visually, it looked stunning. It looked claustrophobic. It felt really, really right. But if you actually look at how we shot that in the days that we shot that there, no one should go through that.
It was pretty crazy.
Yeah.
I have to say, I noticed all the books and I thought, oh, what a job. And then I thought you might say that your favorite set was the lone tent on the ice, because that's simple.
Cinematically, I'm so proud of that tent, because we worked on the shape of that thing for a long time. And, trying to make a tent look stunning is a thing. And I will say that cinematically, they made it look very, very beautiful on the ice.
It popped out at me. That's why I brought it up. I thought, oh, this is so simple, but so beautiful. So well done. All right, guys. Well, at one point in the movie, the character Elizabeth says, it's entirely bewitching. And that's what I have to say about the decor and design of this movie. Shane and Tamara, you both did such an amazing job. And thank you so much for sharing your insights, a couple of secrets, so that we could better understand your world of Frankenstein. It's been a real delight to speak with the both of you. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Halina. It was great.
Thank you so much for having us today. Really, really appreciated the time.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Inside the Set with SETDECOR. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, SETDECOR.com.